Hi, everyone. My name's Darren Anderson. I'm one of the co-founders behind Elect STEM. Really excited to welcome you to today's session, which I think will be a lot of fun. Running for Public Office 101. Elect STEM, for those of you that don't know us, is an organization that we founded to encourage scientists and engineers to run for public office in every political party at every level of government from coast to coast to coast. And we publish articles about running for public office, profiles of elected officials with a STEM background. And we also have a podcast, Periodically Political, where we interview folks that have run for public office. Tonight, we're going to be joined by three awesome panelists, or at least we're hoping to be joined by three awesome panelists. Our third panelist, Bowen Ma, is the MLA for North Vancouver Lonsdale and is Minister of State for Infrastructure in British Columbia. As I think most folks are aware, the situation in British Columbia right now is a little chaotic, and as a minister, we're not certain whether she's going to be able to join us or not tonight, but hopefully she's able to join us at some point and we're able to pick her brain a little bit. But certainly given what's happening out in BC, I think we can all understand if other priorities have pulled her away. For anybody who's interested in learning a little bit more about Bowen, we've actually profiled her previously on our website. She's a licensed professional engineer with a degree in civil engineering, a master's from UBC Sauder School of Business, and is a management professional. I also mentioned our podcast, Periodically Political. So we've had some awesome guests on our podcast in the past. Dalton McGuinty, previous Premier of Ontario, Preston Manning, previous Leader of the Official Opposition federally, and Dr. Mona Namer, the Chief Science Advisor for the Government of Canada. We've also interviewed one of our panelists tonight on our podcast, Dan Gibson. So Dan has joined us here tonight. He is an environmental scientist and a Guelph, Ontario City Councillor. He has a BSc from Trent University and an MSc in environmental science from the University of Toronto. In addition to being a city councillor, he's a senior environmental scientist, natural sciences, and renewable power generation with 15 years working experience in the private and public. Welcome, Dan. Appreciate you spending the time today.
Thank you, Darren. It's a flattering introduction. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And our last guest today, we have not had an opportunity to profile or have on the podcast, although I suspect she knows that an invitation may be coming. But we're joined by Dr. Katie Gibbs. She is a scientist, organizer, and advocate for science and evidence-based policies. While completing her PhD at the University of Ottawa in biology, she was one of the lead organizers of the Death of Evidence rally, which is one of the largest science rallies in Canadian history. Katie co-founded Evidence for Democracy, Canada's leading national, nonpartisan, and not-for-profit organization promoting science and the transparent use of evidence in government. And Katie is currently the Ontario Liberal Party candidate in Ottawa Centre. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me.
So for the audience, I want to state up front, this is an open mic session, which really means we want audience participation. This is your opportunity to ask our excellent panelists about running for public office, being an elected official, what it's like to be in the room where it happens, etc. And so we want as many questions as possible. I've got some questions that we typically ask folks that are running for public office or elected officials, but we'd rather ask your questions. So please put your Q&As into the chat. We'll get to as many of them as you can. Questions. And while Dan and Katie and Bowen have not explicitly said this, I will put some words in their mouth and say that there's no questions that are just, feel free to come up with anything that you think would be you'd be interested in digging into. But before we do that, I want to start by asking each of our panelists to kick us off. So what I'd from each of you is, could you tell the audience a bit about your STEM background and your origin story, why you decided to run for public office? And we'll start with you, Katie. So take us away.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, thanks so much for putting this session together. I think it's really great. I think we need more scientists elected, so it's great to start having this discussion. Um, where to start? I mean, I've always really been interested in influencing public policy and pushing for better policies. I even really went into science originally with the desire to impact policy. So I was really passionate about environmental issues, particularly conservation and biodiversity loss. So I went to grad school to do a PhD in biology and in sort of macro conservation ecology more specifically. And I went into this very naively thinking that, okay, I was going to do some really great research, answer some important questions on biodiversity loss. And, this would be a big part of the solution in, giving some solutions to policymakers. Of course, during my years doing my PhD in academia, I learned that it's not really so simple, and that that pipeline from science to policy is really not that straightforward, and that it's actually very hard to get science used and taken up in the policy realm. And so I got more interested in that, in sort of how do you get decision makers to listen to evidence and to science. So when I finished my degree, I then co-founded Evidence for Democracy and led that organization for about 8 years. And so, in that time, it was a really, incredible experience. It was a lot of fun. It felt like it was very impactful work, really sort of pushing from the outside, through advocacy, through lobbying, through grassroots movement building, really trying to sort of put that pressure on politicians and elected officials to listen to evidence and to prioritize it amongst all of the other inputs and competing factors that they have to take into consideration when they make decisions. And I felt like that work, it did make a difference. But I think, as everyone here knows, at the end of the day, it's still just one input into the decision making process. And so, I've also always been of the mind that I think we need more scientists to actually run and get elected and sit at that decision making table, because even if the science policy process goes perfectly and the science communication goes perfectly, you can still have decision makers that choose not to act on the evidence, and that's their prerogative to do so. So I've always thought that I might run someday, because I've been very passionate about getting more scientists elected. And, it's kind of happened a lot sooner than I thought I would decide to run. And, that really had to do with the pandemic, being pretty frustrated at seeing some of the decisions that were being made around the pandemic that, weren't always using the best available evidence. And then really thinking about the next huge issue coming up after COVID, which on my mind is climate. And I felt like the decisions that we make in the next few years to a decade are going to be so key for sort of determining what kind of future that we're in, that it felt like now was a time when we urgently need more scientific expertise, actually sitting at that seat, at having a seat at the table, that it felt like there wasn't really any time to wait. And so why not do it now? So I think I'll leave it at that, but really looking forward to hearing some questions and having a great discussion. I know that I'm still new in this journey. I can't answer what it's like to be an elected official, because I'm not there yet. But even just so far on this journey, I've already learned so much. So I'm really excited to share that with folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And I think the fact that you've so recently taken the leap and you're doing all of this for the first time, I think will probably be pretty interesting for a lot of the folks in the audience. So really appreciate that. All right. Well, with that, I will throw it to Dan. So same question. Tell us a little bit about your background and your origin story. Why you eventually decided to run for public office.
Sure. Thanks, Darren. And part of me wants to skip over my background and just leapfrog onto what Katie was saying, because so many good points there. Thanks, Katie. Maybe I'll just add, without the voice of science at the table, that can't be part of the equation. Quite oftentimes, I encourage scientists and engineers to get elected to be part of that decision-making process. You don't always win in politics, but you definitely, if you're not at the table, your evidence is not in front of the decision makers. So that's such a key point to electing scientists and STEM professionals. Um, why I ran, like many others, married, 2 kids, need to be home every night, professional, but really just have a heart for service and a heart for giving back to the community. My wife and I both, um, in sort of our 30s, decided that we started looking for opportunities to contribute, to sort of build and build connections into our community. My wife has been serving on the board of Habitat for Humanity locally here in Guelph for the past 6 years and chaired that board as well. All the while, I became friends with a would-be mayor of Guelph back in 2014. So just seeing an opportunity for a leadership opportunity. One of the current counselors of my ward was retiring, and I spent some time with him, got some good guidance, and decided to get to know myself, get to know the people of my ward, and start representing the issues that they care about. So, it starts as an issues-driven agenda as a municipal councillor, but it quickly becomes the community's agenda and the community's concerns. So, for those who are homeowners or living in a city or living in a semi-urban environment, municipal politics is intensely local. Um, roads, garbage, sidewalks, snow clearing, they do matter to people. They are front door pocketbook issues that people care about, and those are things that truly are fulfilling part of the job, helping residents navigate through city policy. But then again, from a science perspective and from a more pragmatic perspective, just being able to sort of future cast and look at the city that we want to build, all the while maintaining affordability and maintaining livability of our city at the same time. It's just a really complex. It's a really complex problem, and something that it's a challenge that I enjoy navigating. As one vote of 13 on a municipal council, you just hope to have your opinion considered when you're making decisions, and you hopefully are all rowing in the same direction, and really making local government an important part of people's daily lives. So that's what drew me to municipal politics. That's sort of the rewarding part. I guess the one aspect that I've found truly rewarding about being on a municipal council is that my professional life still exists. I still go to work every day. It's a part-time position, and I get to be Dan. I get to be the dad who coaches baseball on Sundays and at the arena and at the local school. I'm not affiliated with a party at this point. Not that I'm apolitical. I have my convictions, but at this point in my life, with the age of my kids and just the position in my career, it suits me well, and it helps me serve in the community. So it's a fulfilling job.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate that. And I have been informed that it does look like Bowen will be able to join us here shortly. We're just getting some technical issues worked out on the back end. So, really glad that she was able to make the time here today. And again, I want to encourage everyone to put questions into the chat. Anything you're interested in digging into, we're happy to do so. So maybe before we dig into some of those questions, though, I'm interested in for both of you what the process, at least for you so far, Katie, and for you, Dan, just the whole process looked like in terms of running for public office, from when you made the decision all the way through to when you were elected. If you can kind of walk people through the Coles Notes or the Cliff Notes version of what that looked like. So, Dan, maybe we'll start with you this time.
Sure. Like any good STEM student, it's a matter of education and questioning the process and questioning the system and getting good data to work with. So really, the process began with me just exploring the landscape, exploring the current counselors. I enjoyed, and I supported them both. I thought they were both great representatives for our ward. Sitting down with them for coffee and just getting to know their thoughts. Um, Getting to know myself a little bit from on a public policy stage. You are tested in terms of your opinions. I like to say this to my local neighbors. I am paid for my opinion. Unfortunately, that's part of the role as a municipal councillor. So just trying to maintain an evidence-based approach, a pragmatic approach, and really just remaining myself. My father had a great quote to me when I first decided to run. He said, "Dan, I don't want to see you get good at this." He said, "I want you to be the same person today as you are the day after you get elected, because you'll fall asleep at night better. You'll be able to shake everyone's hand, and it'll just be a happier person." So that's the mentality I take. And again, the process of knocking on doors, that's a process in itself. Maybe I'll touch on that for a moment. It can be daunting, 25,000 people in my ward. I want to get to everyone's door. I want to get to know their issues, and sometimes that fear of failure, or that, what are the other candidates doing, that can take over. And really, the only thing that took that away from me, that fear of failure, or that fear of not being elected, was knocking on doors. So our election is in October. I committed myself in May to 2 hours a night, 5 days a week. So about 10 hours a week of strictly knocking on doors with my pamphlet, shaking people's hands, saying hi, asking about their intentions on the election, and building a bit of a database, building an email list, building a website, and encouraging people to get involved. And before you know it, after 3 months, you look up and you've knocked on 7,000 doors, and you've individually spoken to 3,000 people, and that matters in elections. Um, I would almost argue that matters the most. At the municipal level, issues can drive agendas on a provincial or federal scale, but at a municipal level, people want to get to know you, and I found that to be probably the biggest boost to my campaign, was just committing that time to knocking on doors and getting into people's neighborhoods, and finding out what they were thinking about. So
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. So, Katie, you've obviously recently received the nomination for your riding. So, tell us a little bit about what that process looked like, and what it's looked like coming out of receiving the nomination.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's quite different, because when you run provincially or federally, it's almost always with a party. You can run as an independent, but it's a lot more challenging. And so when you run, under a party banner, you sort of have to, almost win an internal election first, usually, to actually be the candidate. So you have to undergo this nomination process first. So originally it was kind of similar to Dan, like a lot of, talking to people, trying to figure out, did this make sense for me right now in my life, looking at the political landscape, and talking to a lot of, people who've had the job. I think that's something that often we don't talk that much about, but, I really wanted to know before I embarked on this, what does the actual job of an MPP look like, day to day, and, what does the travel schedule look like? Like, I really wanted to know all of those things before I, seriously stepped down this path. Um, and so then, once I decided that I wanted to run for the nomination, the interesting thing is, I think that a lot of people think that the nomination processes are quite closed off. Like, you sort of have to, be a party insider or something in order to put yourself forward for the nomination. And, I kind of thought that as well. But in my case, I did not really have like deep roots with the party in my riding. And, so it started off by really just talking to people and introducing myself. And I was surprised at how, open and receptive and excited people were about the possibility of me running. So I think that's something, scientists should keep in mind. I think that the process is a lot more open than they think it is, and that, most scientists are a lot more of a like exciting catch as a candidate than they might think that they are. The process is fairly rigorous. Like, even just in order to start the nomination process, you first have to like apply to the party, and I first did that in January. And, that was a lot of paperwork. Basically they want to kind of vet you, do a little bit of a, background check on you, sort of thing. And once you go through that sort of internal approval process, then I officially became a nomination candidate. And, the nomination process is a little bit, it's kind of gray. The parties all run the nomination processes themselves internally, so that it's not kind of a standard thing across the board. It's not something that is really governed by Elections Ontario or Elections Canada. So, in this case, it was a bit of a wait and see to see, who else was going to run. And in that meantime, it was really just, a lot of introducing myself to people in the riding. In my case, I did this all during COVID. So, for the whole time that I was running for the nomination, we pretty much did everything virtually. So, we did a lot of phone canvassing instead of door canvassing. We did sort of virtual coffee parties. Friends would kind of host a coffee party and invite their friends to it. So it was really just introducing myself, talking about the issues. And that went on until the party sort of called the nomination in September. And at that point, nobody else had entered the field. So I was acclaimed in September. And so now I'm officially the candidate. And now, so the election here is in June. So now it's, really just been starting to kind of ramp it up, putting a campaign team together, starting to get out and knock on doors, because, we have a lot of them. And, same thing as Dan, I really want to try to get to every single one. And so it is a little bit daunting and intimidating, and it is a lot of work. But yeah, that's been the process so far.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So just to follow up on that, so you're now your infrastructure to be able to run. How does the party help you with that? Do you have to do all of that on your own? What resources, now that you have the nomination, what resources are there to help make sure that you're able to run the best possible campaign?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the pros of running, under a party. I think, there are pros and cons, but that's definitely a pro, is that you get this infrastructure. So both, there's people at the central party that have been incredibly helpful. They have like their database that you get to use. They have templates for your literature, your sort of candidate postcard. They have templates for those things that are ready to go, templates for websites. So there's a lot of things that they sort of already take care of. And then at the same time, locally, there's already an existing group of people here who are engaged with the party, who are, once you become the candidate, they kind of automatically become your people and are, excited to help you and join your team. So you sort of, there's sort of a lot of resources and, teamwork and camaraderie that come with running under a party banner, for sure. So you're very much not starting from scratch or trying to, build it all yourself as an individual, which is nice.
Awesome. So you both talked about the idea of kind of testing this out, right? Getting to know people in your community, getting to know people in your riding association, trying to get a sense of whether this is something you'd like to do. And we have a question from Aaron in the audience who's asked, what do you recommend is the best way to get involved with your local riding or your local works?
Sure, Darren. I think I heard you say what's the best way to get involved in your local riding? Maybe I'll take that. Maybe I'll handle that from a municipal perspective. What's the best way to get involved in the decision-making body of the community or the local municipality? Whenever anyone comes to me and says, Dan, I want to run for council, I'll immediately turn to them and say, okay, I don't discount anyone who wants to come and run for council. I ask them a few simple questions about who they are and are they comfortable with their own decision-making abilities. We've got another guest here. So maybe I'll take a step back here for a second, Darren, and I'll let you introduce Owen.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, it's been a wild ride just getting this up and running. I know I'm jumping in here. Sorry, Darren, you're hosting. I'll cede it over to you.
Actually, I think
Or
Darren
am I-
might be frozen here. So maybe I'll ask the question that Darren asked. Hi, Bowen. I'm Dan. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Dan.
We're doing a sort of a Q&A, but first off, we wanted to perhaps take a few moments to introduce yourself, your background, your STEM background, and what drew you into representing your local constituency.
Oh, geez, Dan, you just stepped right into that role like a pro. Oh my goodness.
Sure.
So, hi everyone. My name is Bowen Ma. I serve as the member of the Legislative Assembly for the riding known as North Vancouver Lonsdale in British Columbia. I also serve as the Minister of State for Infrastructure here in British Columbia. And for many of you will know that British Columbia is currently in its third state of emergency this year, the third one following an extreme climate event that hit the southwest part of British Columbia last week. So we suffered major flooding and infrastructure damage, catastrophic infrastructure damage. We've got supply routes that we're working to secure and stabilize. And so part of the reason why I'm late is because that work has been keeping me very busy over the last couple of weeks. And the other part of the reason why I'm late is because turns out being a professional engineer does not protect you from tech issues as you're trying to get online to these things. So thank you so much for your patience. As I noted, prior to becoming a MLA in 2017, I am still right now a professional engineer. So I graduated from the University of British Columbia with a degree in civil engineering. I have a master's in management from the Sauder School of Business as well. And prior to becoming elected, I was managing construction, airport expansion redevelopment projects out at the Vancouver Airport Authority. And I know that part of the question, Daniel, that you asked so wonderfully, what led me to leave that kind of STEM career to pursue service here as an MLA. I think it was a number of things. One is that I did not have the benefit of growing up in a politically literate family. And so it was later in life that I started to really make the connection between government policies and the impacts that they have on people and families and communities. It was also a little bit later, like I was in, my late 20s, early 30s, before I really understood inequality and how government policies can reduce or increase inequality. And like a lot of people, once you start to see the connections and once you start to see the impacts that politics has on our day-to-day lives, on the lives of people who we love, on our community, on our friends, in a very, very real way, it's very hard to turn off that awareness. And so I started to organize and get more involved in politics. And then I found myself doing a lot of complaining and realized at some point that I didn't actually know the challenges that these politicians were forced to make choices about.
Right.
And that it might be very easy for me to kind of, offer comments on the sideline or yell at my I would say TV, but really my computer screen. But if I really wanted to, walk the talk, then I should at least be willing to put myself in the position of really understanding what it is that political and elected officials are being forced to choose between, and hope that I make better choices. And it also came to the point where I realized that the most challenging issues that we face as a society, as a species, inequality, climate change, climate emergency and crisis, the true barriers for us resolving those issues are actually not technical. They're political. They have everything to do with political will. And when I say political will, I don't just mean at the government level and elected politics and partisanship and that kind of thing. I mean political will of all of us as members of the public, as members of the community, and that all the technical solutions in the world would not save us from ourselves if we weren't willing to actually pull together in the right direction. And so that's when I realized I had to do more. And this was one of the ways that I sought to try that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bowen. Is working all right now? I can take back over as moderator.
You can try, Darren.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Dan, for stepping in. I appreciate that.
No problem.
If I do drop out, you're in charge.
Okay.
Bowen, one of the things that you dug into there that I thought was really interesting is I think as scientists, we see this utopian vision of politics that, well, at ElectSTEM, we're about getting more scientists and engineers to run for public. I think scientists and engineers, that if politicians just knew all the facts and had all of the information, they would make the right decisions. But obviously, politics and values and risk assessments and the reality of the situation also has an impact on things. I'd love to get your sense of things. How much do political, how do you think about that in the context of your background as an, and from there we'll go over to Katie and then to Dan.
So Darren, you're cutting out a little bit, so I didn't quite catch the actual question, but my sense of the question is, how do you reconcile the STEM desire to see everything in facts and figures and data analysis and the realities of politics? Is that kind of fair? All right. You know, it is very challenging because you're right. When I mean, coming in here as an engineer, I see data very differently from a lot of my colleagues. Like those of us who are more attuned to the both the wonders and the shortfalls of statistical analysis know that, you know, you can make numbers say a lot of things if you know, there are ways for you to interpret different numbers are put before you. And I feel like with my STEM background, I'm able to understand what stats are and are not telling us in a way that maybe others with less statistical understanding of statistics can immediately pick up. And there's a desire to communicate in very fact and figure ways. Like, I mean, I'm not communicating very well right now, but one of the things that I remember struggling with was that the way that I started out campaigning and the way that I communicated with people was very engineering-like. And I had to learn very quickly how to change the way that I communicated with people. Like as engineers and oftentimes as scientists and other professionals and experts in STEM, things like anecdotal evidence is not necessarily taken in high regard. But when it comes to talking to the general population, stories that help connect people to what it is that you're trying to do, like real life examples, are actually really important. And it was actually quite a challenge for me to be able to learn how to communicate in that way, in a way that connected with people who were not engineers, who were not scientists. And the reason why that's important is because of that aspect of social change that I mentioned, the need for political will, the need for the public to pull together in the same direction. And you need people who do and do not necessarily think like you to be able to do that. So that ability is extremely important. I think sometimes I enter into these forums for folks in STEM, and we talk about the benefits of having engineers and scientists and technologists in the legislature, and I absolutely agree, there are huge benefits. But we would probably also be in trouble if the entire legislature was full of engineers. I'm not sure that we would be able to fully bring the public on board on everything that we did if we did not have the diversity of views and perspectives to help form our approach on things and help ensure that our policies are actually meeting the needs of the broad public.
Awesome. Thanks, Bowen. Katie, would you like to respond to the same question?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Bowen made some excellent points, and I agree. I think sometimes we oversimplify this, and it can sort of make it sound like we think that the science is like an arrow pointing to like the one right decision. And of course it isn't. Science informs these decisions, but the reality is that, almost all big political decisions, when it comes down to it, it's about weighing different values. And that is how the decision is going to be made. And your hope is that evidence kind of went into informing where the scales are sitting, so that you're seeing it an accurate picture of where the scales are sitting. So that's kind of how I think about it. But for me, it's really about what scientists do bring in terms of that, diversity of how we think. I do think that our training does mean that we might think differently from, some of the other people who are often at the decision making table. We know there are some professions that are, sort of overrepresented maybe in elected office. And I think there's some, it's obviously not the, my PhD was very, basically just, doing fancy statistics in R. I'm not going to be doing that as an MPP. It's not those specific skills that are really at all transferable. But, how I view it is that it's, the way that we're challenged, the way that we're trained to challenge our own assumptions, the way that we're trained to ask for evidence. I really liked the way Tracy from Sense About Science put it earlier, in terms of we know how to ask testable questions. And part of that is, we know how to frame things in a way that it's testable, and how we're asking for evidence and checking those assumptions. And I think another big aspect of it is who our networks are as well. There's been a lot of research into how politicians make decisions and where they go for information. And often once people get elected, they know that everybody who's meeting them has, some sort of vested interest. And so they really kind of close it up who they listen to, and really go back to trusting like who is in their personal network, their friends and their family, because they kind of know that everybody else is lobbying them. And I think one of the interesting things is that for scientists, I think about in my case, those trusted networks almost are all scientists. You know what I mean? Those trusted people that I feel like I could have those conversations with are scientists and experts, and those would be the kind of people that I would be going to. And so I think that, these are some of the ways that that it does, sort of indirectly benefit to have more scientists having a seat at the decision-making table.
Katie, I believe Evidence for Democracy published a survey of elected officials around where they get their information, and one of their answers was their peers, to go along with what you just said.
Yeah, peers and family. Family was such a big one, and I think it did come from that sense that, they felt like everybody else was lobbying them. And so they kind of really shrunk who they trusted, which, makes a lot of sense. But then it also does beg the question of, who are they going to as a sounding board, and who are they getting information from?
That makes sense. Dan, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll pick up on both responses so far. I think it's true. I think if we were all scientists at the table, or all engineers, we would definitely have a hard time connecting. The soft skills don't necessarily get taught in third-year biology at university, but the fact of the matter is, the more diverse your decision-making body, the more diverse the lived experience, the opinions, the viewpoints. I've learned this begrudgingly. I have learned this in my life, that is always leads to the better outcome. And so, in some of the most candid interviews that I hear are not of politicians in the moment themselves, but it's actually past politicians, past prime ministers. So Chrétien, Martin, Harper, perhaps one day Trudeau, when they write their memoirs, and we find out what they were balancing in the moment when they made that decision that we didn't understand. The auto bailout, why we bought a pipeline, all those things. From a scientific perspective, we have a strong opinion about, but when you're balancing the economy, the environment, the social well-being of your people, it's it's just a fascinating place to be. I'm trying to relate this back to the municipal level. You know, when we were trying to implement a new transit service right now, huge support from the federal government, provincial government on overhauling our entire transit system, moving to electric vehicles. In a mid-sized city like Guelph, it's a big price tag. But it's an important price tag to take on. So we say yes to that. But on the counter side, we see, okay, what is the fallout? You know, are we going to drive new riders? Is this only going to be on the backs of the homeowners and businesses? Are we able to play with fares to help accommodate these costs? Those are all pieces of the puzzle at the municipal level anyway that have really taught me that my voice is valid, but it's not the only voice at the table, and it's important to weigh those as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So we have a question from Farah, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. I'll do my best. But the question, we already talked a little bit around what convinced you to take the leap to run for public office, but how do you reckon with the fear of failure? What happens if you run and you lose? And I don't know whether or not, I know Katie's first time. I don't know whether, Dan, you've lost, and I don't know about Bowen. So we'll see how this goes. But maybe, Bowen, do you want to kick us off?
Gosh, you know what? So when I decided to run, I knew that I was running in a riding that my political party had not won in about 2.5 decades, since I was about 10 years old. And I also knew that in the history of the province, across both provincial and federal elections, across the 3 federal and 4 provincial ridings in the sub-region that I lived, my political party had only been successful 2 times before me. You could count third if you count the CCF as the precursor to the NDP. I think Dorothy Steeves held a seat on the North Shore for 2 terms back in 1933, I think, something like that. But it was a history of not really safe seats for my political party. So I knew that I was taking a big risk. And one of the risks that you take when you run at a senior level is that the reality is independents are election of independents at senior levels of government is very, very rare. If you run and you want to win, you're going to have to pick a team. Doesn't have to be the perfect team. It's got to be a team that you believe in enough to be able to work with, a team that, you know, represents the values and principles that you believe in, and you hope that you can work with the team to make everything better. But when you pick a team, it partisanizes you. And as somebody who was not partisan beforehand, it automatically colored the way that some people saw me, based purely on the political party. Even if they know me their entire life, the fact that you chose a side colors the way that you are seen in the eyes of a lot of people. And so that was a risk and a choice that I had to know that I was taking, and I was doing it for a riding that was probably not going to go my way. And one of the things that drove me to do it, despite all that, is the overwhelming feeling that I could not do nothing. And we were coming off of a government, in my opinion, that the reason why it drove me there to run was I could not see the previous government running the province again. They had hurt too many of my family, my friends, and for me, I could not live with myself without doing everything that I possibly could to try to change it. I didn't have to run myself. It could have been somebody else, but nobody else ended up stepping up for the riding, so I did. And the other thing that I kept in focus as I was doing the campaign was that I wanted to make sure that no matter what the outcome was, the reason that I lost that riding was not because I did not work hard enough. And I did not do everything that I could to try to win the riding on behalf of my community, right? Because it can't be about me. And I can't let myself be the reason why I lost because I didn't work my ass off. And so going in there and making sure that I did, and it was hard, worked really hard so that I would be confident that if the time came and I was not successful, I would know that at the very least I could sleep at night knowing that I did everything I could.
Bowen, that Dan, you.
Same. There's a fear of failure when you take on a huge challenge. When you take on something that scares you, the 24 hours after you declare that you're running and your name goes through the paper and you get this great shot of adrenaline, and then 24 hours later you look back and you're like, well, what did I do? Uh-oh. Now what? So leaning, to me personally, what I've learned in big challenges in my life is that I can't run from them. I can't hide. I can't just go home and be in a sort of a cave. I need to lean into those issues. And that's what I personally found motivating when I was running for municipal office, was just that fear of failure went away when I was knocking on doors and meeting people and just getting to 100 doors a night and just continue to push through the fear of failure. And eventually you just get to a point, like Bowen said, where you believe you have done everything you can. And you, maybe I'll couch this with this for all those considering running for election: don't lose yourself in the process of an election. You don't have to become somebody you're not. You just need to be yourself. Don't worry about the dirty tricks. Just be yourself. People want authenticity at the door. People want authenticity after you're elected as well. And that I believe that's the longevity key in politics, is just continue to be yourself, even if you have to pick a party and it's a difficult place to stand sometimes. Be yourself and focus on authenticity, and people will gravitate towards that.
Awesome. Katie?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so even when I ran for the nomination, it was certainly not a given that I was even going to win the nomination to become the candidate. And now, I don't know what the outcome of the next provincial election is going to look like. So I think, for starters, for me personally, I don't see not winning the election as failure. I very much went into it feeling like, if I give this my all, that will be winning. There's a lot of, I think even by running, you're influencing the conversation, you're influencing the debate, you're influencing the discussions that are had during the election. And so, I felt like that was, winning already. Like I don't in my mind don't view it as, if I don't win the election, the whole thing will be a failure. So I think that's, an important way to frame it for me personally. And I think, I just want to touch on what Bowen said about, what was it? The partisanizing. I really related to those comments as well. Very similar for me. I, did not come from a very partisan background. And, I think that was the hard part for me, was that idea of like picking a team. And I think it's worth talking a little bit about, because, from my conversation with scientists, that's a huge barrier for people getting involved. Right. And it makes sense, because as scientists, we like to be independent. We want to have we do have our own, very nuanced views on almost every issue. And part of the challenge, of course, is that once you pick a team, there's kind of the sense that you have to, take all of the policies that come with the team. And, of course, you're not going to agree with every single one of them. If you think of how complex the policy landscape is, almost nobody, I would think, completely lines up 100% with a political party's view on every single issue. And so that was really one of the big hurdles for me in making this decision, was, deciding to partisanize myself. And, I think I've also, experienced a little bit of what, Bowen said, is there are some people who, it does seem like they immediately treat you different, like the next day, because you've put on that partisan hat, which is kind of funny, because, I'm the same person I was the day before, and I think the same things and have all the same views. So, personally, I think that says a little bit about how we need to maybe think about engaging in partisan politics as scientists. I think sometimes we think of it as like, partisan is a dirty word or something. And I think maybe we need to kind of just change how we think about that culturally within the scientific community. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Makes a lot of sense, and is certainly an interesting topic. So one question just relating to what Katie and Bowen talked about around being partisanized and viewed differently by their community. If you're open to it, I'd love to get a little bit of a perspective in terms of how you think about running for public office and the reaction of your friends and community with respect to your family and other people in your life that may be impacted by this decision. And Katie, since you've made the decision most recently, maybe if you're willing to share it and start, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there really has been that, that much of a direct impact. For me, the bottom line was about, you know, it's like Bowen said, none of the parties are perfect. You have to pick the one that is the best fit for you and that you feel like you can, carry that flag. And for me, it sort of feels like, sure, it's easier to sit on the sidelines and not engage in that partisan world. Like, of course, that's sort of easier and cleaner, but the issues that we're facing are so critical and so urgent that, particularly for me, climate action is one of the main reasons why I'm running. And so it just felt like it was worth it to, face any potential, losing a few, contacts here and there who, might not be as inclined to engage with me because I'm now partisan, was just far worth it for the potential of, influencing the debate at least, and hopefully even having a seat at the decision making table in this moment where we're facing, making some huge transformational decisions on, dealing with literally the crisis of our lifetime. So I can't really say there's been too much of a fallout. And even a lot of my friends are heavily engaged in other political parties, and for the most part, all of those close friends and family are still there, and they know that it doesn't actually change anything. So for the most part, it's totally fine and not really a big issue.
Awesome. Dan, what about you?
I agree. The hardest part of being an elected official for me after the election. So the elections are it's always silly season at the municipal level. Everyone sort of goes their own different way. But the first time I met someone for the first time and I felt like they knew me way more than I knew them was a really weird thing for me. They had already prejudged who I was or made a judgment call on what they thought of me before I had met them. And so, living in that reality, that happens a few times a year still. And just continuing to greet those people the same I would greet anyone else, letting them get a feel for who I am, not just what they read in the newspaper or what they see on TV, but just get a feel for who I am. Quite oftentimes pops those bubbles and allows us to just focus on what we're all commonly interested in. So whether it be at the hockey rink or at the school or at the library or the baseball field, we're there for baseball. And those are the things that that's our commonality in the day, and so we can focus on what kind of brings us together rather than what separates us. And again, at the municipal level, I think there's a lot more opportunity for me at this stage of my life with the two young kids, just continuing to be me, and then maybe it's very similar to Katie and Bowen's realities. My wife is also a professional. She goes to work every day in the city, and not subjecting her to commentary or questions, or not subjecting my kids to commentary or questions. It's just maybe it's the easier path right now at the municipal level than provincial or federal. So that's my thoughts on that one.
Oh, and another provincial perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how this work impacts my family and friends and so forth, I mean, I see a lot less of them than I would like to. And I mean, I made the very conscious decision not to involve my partner publicly because I felt like he deserved his private life and deserved to. This was a choice that I made, and he supported me in becoming more public. but it can be very challenging on family. And so there are elected officials who choose to involve their family in their public life, and there are elected officials who choose not to. And that's a decision that I think has to be made as a family. But in terms of like the partisanship and how that impacted me personally and the relationships that I had, I would say that for me, one of my least favorite parts of electoral politics is fundraising. I hate asking people for money. And when I decided to run and I was seeking the nomination, I was doing my work fundraising. I found that was actually an extremely emotionally challenging time for me, because your instinct and what most elected official candidates, most political candidates do, is you go to your immediate network first. And because I had picked a side, and that impacts the way that a lot of people see you, there was a lot of rejection based purely on the side that I had picked. And potentially sometimes from people who had known me for years and who I respected and who I thought respected me. And it was quite painful, I have to admit, to have to, because you've back when I ran in 2016, 2017, British Columbia had basically no electoral financing rules. There were basically no limits for fundraising. So the dollar values, the dollar amounts that you had to raise to be competitive were enormous. And so the pressure to go out and fundraise was enormous. And because you're doing something that you really believe in, and you have this fear of failure, that the failure will impact your community and your family and the people that you care about. The pressure to raise those funds was also enormous, and the rejection was hard not to take personally. And you take it and it hurts, and then you have to charge ahead because there's no time to waste on your own, feelings of hurt and stuff. So that actually was a very challenging time. But what I discovered through the process also were the people who were really my friends, the people who stuck around, who believed in me, who donated, even if they didn't like the party that I picked, that they still supported me because they knew me and they believed and trusted me. Those people honestly really saved my, how do I say it? They saved my like desire, or my, not desire, like my willingness to run. Like it can, when you choose this work, you have to be prepared for it to really suck at times. Okay, it's not, if it's important, it also means that it's not easy. And knowing who the people that you can rely on, even when they disagree with your opinions or the things that you've done, who believe that you've done the best that you can, given the circumstances, and still stand by you. I don't think that I could be here today without those people. And so as hard as that process was, it also really reaffirmed for me how fortunate I am to have the support that I got from family and friends.
Great, thanks, Owen. And that's actually a really good pivot to one of our audience questions from Rumya. How did you scientists and policymakers? So maybe if you can each give us an example of something where there's been a science or engineering related issue and you've been able to influence that as part of either official or being, Katie, in your case, maybe evidence for democracy. But Dan, maybe you want to kick us off with an example?
Sure. Yeah, two that I think about, besides the front door issues, the garbage cans, the waste pickup, the snow removal, there is still lots of policy that we talk about at the local level. The first, and probably one of the more first ones that I'm proud of, is just in 17, I believe I brought forward a motion calling on our staff and our administration to adopt a fully electric transit fleet. So not just transit, but also all of our fleet vehicles, our building inspectors, our bylaw inspectors, our police force, to start transitioning to fully electric vehicles. That was one that I was proud of. The second one was when we were doing our natural heritage action plan. So our corridors and our wildlife corridors in this city, I actually pressed it. I tried to marry the two with our sustainability group at City Hall, looking at how we could start accounting for our carbon accounting, and bringing that into our cultural heritage action plan. So how are our wetlands, forest stands helping us sequester carbon in our pursuit of a net zero economy, a net zero community before 2050. So I like to say that we adopted the net zero 2050 vision before the federal government, and we did 1 year before, but we're happy to see that they were listening, and they took it upon themselves to pass a similar motion in Ottawa. So those are some of the sort of policy pushes that, from a pragmatic perspective, but also from an environmental perspective, I'm trying to balance what's realistic at the municipal level with sort of those far-sighted visions and desires on climate.
Great, thanks. Bowen, throw it to you.
Yeah, so my work as Minister of State for Infrastructure is primarily within the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. And my civil engineering background, although most of my professional experience is in construction, which is very helpful experience for me to bring to the table in this role now, I also have an academic background in transportation as well. I didn't, just to be clear, because I always want to be like accurate and fair, I did not work as a transportation engineer. Sometimes people write it up that way, but that's not accurate. I have an academic background in transportation. It's also an area of passion for me. And so being able to bring that expertise to the table when we're talking about, diversifying our transportation systems, ensuring multimodal, like taking a look at transportation from a multimodal lens, and the importance of driving down GHG emissions from transportation, which in British Columbia make up about 40% of our GHG emissions, is, I believe, really valuable. I mean, I suppose I would prefer to leave it to others to say if it has been valuable, but I hope it has been, and I feel I do have a lot to contribute there.
Thanks, Bowen. Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any concrete examples yet. hopefully in a conference or two. But I do want to add that another way that, you can influence policy even by running, and, ultimately, even if you're not successful in getting elected, is actually, through the party's, internal process for developing policy and developing the platforms. And I mean, this is something that people can do, even without actually putting their own name down as a candidate. Most of the parties have somewhat open ways that you can participate in a policy discussion and policy processes internally. But certainly as a candidate, this was another reason why I saw value in running, even if I don't get elected, why I think it's valuable is that realistically, the parties are made up of people, and the parties' policies are not static over time. I mean, just think of over the last decade how much the positions of the various political parties has shifted over time. And it shifts primarily based on who is involved, who steps up and takes a leadership position within the party. And so I view it as another way that I can hopefully have influence, and that I'm certainly working to have influence behind the scenes right now, is within the party, in making, in pushing for certain policies, pushing for policies to be science-based and evidence-based. And, I see that as having an impact already internally. So I think that's just another element to add here.
Great, thanks, Katie. And that actually leads into another audience question from Anamita, who is asking about how to get involved in if you have a policy related issue, how can you get involved in ways that aren't necessarily running for political office? And I know one thing I've been struck by with the work that we do with Elect STEM is just how accessible our elected officials are. I think we watch American politics and we think it's impossible, but in Canada, our elected officials are really very accessible, and that's something I've been impressed by. So maybe if each of you can talk a little bit about, how can you have an influence if you don't want to run for public office, but you've got a science-based policy issue that you really want to have an impact on. And obviously, Katie, I suspect this is near and dear to your heart, given your background. So maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to comment on that. This really was a focus of a lot of the work that we did at Evidence for Democracy was around trying to equip, individual scientists and researchers with the skills that they need to try to get their policy ideas and their science to decision makers. And you're right. I think that they are quite approachable in Canada, and there's ways to do it. So I suggest actually going to the E4D website. They've prepared a few toolkits on, basically how to approach your decision maker, like how to schedule a meeting, how to get in touch with them. And also, I think usually the first step is to try to really think about when is the right time to do it and what is the right level of government, and kind of spend some time trying to think through which level of government actually has the power to implement your idea, and then trying to see, if you can, tie it to something specific, like if there is, budget consultation happening, for example, or, especially federally, there are often consultations on many different issues. So those opportunities when government is already sort of, throwing open the doors and saying, we want to hear from you, is a great way to try to, basically look for those opportunities where the door or the policy window is already open, and then try to get your idea in that way. So there are a lot of resources out there. You definitely don't have to run for office to get your policy to a decision maker.
Awesome. So Bowen, as somebody who I'm sure receives a number of these proposals and concepts, what advice would you have for somebody in that situation?
So as a local MLA, I rely on what I'm hearing from community members about what's going on around the community, because I can't possibly be everywhere at once, and I can't possibly be in everyone's living room and their dining room table listening to their conversations. If they don't tell me, then I don't know what they're thinking and I don't know what's important to them. And so I'm very influenced by the stories and the correspondence and the information that my constituents offer to me. Now, of course, I'll often on issues, especially controversial issues, get a wide variety of opinions, and I can't possibly represent every single one. But what I can do is take them into account and learn from them and help use that information to inform my thinking on it, and ensure that the various issues that are being raised are at least taken into account by whoever's file it is. And so for me, and I recognize that not every elected official is equally as accessible across the country, but if a member of the public had an idea that they didn't know where to go to, I would welcome them to email me about it. And if it doesn't fall within provincial jurisdiction, me or my staff will let them know where to go. I often recommend to community members that when in doubt, use us as a resource. Let us help guide you as to the best way forward. Depending on the issue, there are also other ways, of course, to get involved in policy making and influencing policy. You can get organized with not-for-profit organizations, get involved in democratic movements. You can also get involved directly with political parties. And Katie had mentioned that there's policymaking forums within political parties. You often have to be a member in order to participate. And being a member of a political party can sound really scary for some people, but the barriers are actually pretty low. In British Columbia, being a member of my party, the New Democrat Party, is, I think it's a $10 entry fee per year. But if you are a lower income or underemployed, you can get in for $1. So we're talking pretty low barrier, and you can also pull your membership at any time. You are not trapped in that party forever. I think that in the States, there's people are pretty deep rooted in the party that they attach themselves to, but that's not the case up here in Canada. By and large, the vast majority of the public don't necessarily see themselves as lifelong Democrats or liberals or conservatives or so forth. So there's ways to become involved in political parties without it being so scary that you think that you're stuck with them forever.
Awesome. Dan, municipally?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm happy to go third because I was trying to pragmatically bring up something that I could offer here. If you're listening and you want to get involved in policy development or policy advisory, go onto your local city's website. So in my case, it would be the City of Guelph, and type in the search bar, public advisory committees. And on public advisory committees, we welcome applicants. So in the City of Guelph, we have over 30 public advisory committees. There's an environmental advisory committee. There's a accessibility committee, public art, downtown Guelph, planning and development, where they are voluntary committees that you sit on, and the staff bring files to you for your input. So it's more of a proactive consultation with the community. And you can be advising at that level. Oftentimes, a lot of our council candidates come out of being very active on the advisory committee level, and then they've gotten into enough files that they want to step forward and make a difference at the decision-making table. So that is one way, that a direct way that you could get involved in local government. The other, and I think Bowen mentioned it, is local nonprofits. I mentioned earlier, my wife's been sitting on the board of the local Habitat for Humanity chapter for the last 6 years. Local nonprofits have influence. They have influence when they come before council and delegate. They have influence when they call me saying, Dan, I have a problem here. How can I help? How can I help? How can you help me with this? They do have influence, and being on a local nonprofit board is a really great way to contribute and form policy in your local community.
And sorry, can I jump in there and pick up on something that Dan said, which was those kind of public engagement opportunities?
Sure.
Those absolutely exist at the provincial level as well, at perhaps the federal level too. But in British Columbia, we regularly have open public engagement opportunities on like a myriad of files. That's how we developed the daylight savings time policy, which we have yet to complete yet, but there have been some emergencies that have stood in the way of that becoming a priority. Our approach to old growth forests and forest management in the province, we did a public consultation on paid sick leave, and now British Columbians are going to have 5 days of employer paid sick leave as of January 1st. So there's lots of those kind of public engagement opportunities at different levels of government. So thanks so much for bringing that up, Dan.
That sounds great. And I hopefully that's inspirational for some of the folks in the audience. So it's a somewhat related question, and this is probably more for Dan and Bowen, but what does your day-to-day look like as an elected official? Bowen, obviously you mentioned it's a lot of work and a lot of time, but maybe if you could just give folks a sense of how do you spend that time and what does it look like?
Did you want me to start?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. And again, every elected official is different because the needs of the community are different. Their style is different. For me, in my first term, I would expect to work about 80 to 100 hours a week, every week of the year. And now it's probably closer to, I would say, like 60 to 80, in large part because the pandemic took away a lot of the social events that elected officials often attend. So in pre-pandemic times, and perhaps hopefully in the near future as we come out of this pandemic, elected officials are involved in many different social events and other community obligations. And those social events are really important because it helps you stay connected to the community. People like to see you there. They know that you support not-for-profit or different celebrations. It makes you accessible and so forth. A big part of my time is spent on correspondence. Me and my 1.8 FTE local community office staff process about 45,000 incoming emails per year. So tons of correspondence. When the legislative session is sitting, I'm in Victoria, and that happens from Monday to Thursday. And the session itself runs usually from 10 a.m. to about 7 p.m. It fluctuates a bit on a day-to-day basis, and your meetings will start at about 8 a.m. And oftentimes you'll have an evening meeting as well. So it's not uncommon for us to have our first meeting at 8 a.m. or even 7:30, and our last meeting end at 9 p.m. And again, pre-pandemic, there would be a lot of groups, not-for-profit groups, business groups who are looking to speak with elected officials, and oftentimes the only time to do that is during breakfast, during lunch, and during dinner. Lots and lots of meetings, tons of meetings, lots of engagement sessions, public engagement sessions like this, and a lot of time sitting in the house. Yeah. Kind of changes around. Yeah.
Excellent. So Dan, Bowen's just described her what sounds like 2 full-time jobs as an elected official. You're obviously part-time. Maybe tell us a little bit about just what your days look like, and also how the part-time piece works with you also having a full-time gig on the side, and just how you balance that.
Sure. So it is a part-time, full-time job being a municipal councillor, no matter how big your city is, because the phone can always ring. So if fireworks are going off at 11:30 at night on a Saturday, you'll get a phone call from someone saying, "If I'm up, you're up, Dan." That's how it goes. But my normal day, I don't look as tired as I feel. Trust me. I sometimes feel like Monday to Friday are an absolute whirlwind. And then Saturday, Sunday come and I get to just be a dad and coach baseball. But most of my days start at 5 a.m. I'm in my office in Toronto for 7, leave the office at 3. I usually do council work over my lunch hour, shoot home, hopefully have dinner with the family. And during normal times, I go to City Hall once to twice a week. The pandemic, I hate admitting this, but the pandemic's actually brought a little bit of balance to our life. I can take my calls from the office at home now, so I can see my kids a little bit longer. So that's been refreshing, but you're right. It's as much or as little as you want it to be. Your ultimate accountability is your constituents. But at the same time, it does require a lot of you. So if you have a spouse, if you have a partner, make sure they're very supportive. I'm sure Bowen and Katie can agree to that. Make sure they are supportive, because they will not see you very often, at least for the first year. That's what I've been told, and that was true for us. So my second son was born 10 days before my first election, and that first year was a true test, but it's all worked out.
Excellent. That gives folks a bit of a reality check in terms of what this looks like. So that's good. All right. So 2 final questions. The first is, say somebody who's listening to this says, you know what, you guys have inspired me, excited about the potential to have an impact and serve. I want to get started. How would you recommend somebody who's thinking about getting started? What's the first thing that you would recommend that they do if this is something that they're passionate about and they want to explore? And Dan, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Take some time to understand what you're asking of yourself. Go to your spouse, go to your significant other, go to your family, ensure that they understand and are fully have understanding of the expectations of what will become of your time. After that, really getting into the nitty-gritty science data metric part, when you knock on that door, you have 30 seconds. Make your points quick, because sometimes they're not going to want to hear from you. Sometimes they're going to completely disagree, and make sure those 3 points are on point, succinct, and you present them nicely, because those are the people that they're going to be putting their trust in you. And so, and to set the appropriate time aside to get to enough doors. That would be my first round of advice.
Who's going next?
Oh, Katie, sorry, I was flipping the mute the wrong direction. Katie?
Oh, no worries. I think first it's, if you decided that you want to run, but you're not entirely sure for what, I think that's the next step, is sort of figuring out that calculation of what level of government, what party, and that requires, taking a look at sort of what that political landscape looks like, where you live, what riding you might run in. And I think that analysis can take some time. And, I think a lot of politics and a lot of running is getting the timing right. And so, I think it's quite conceivable that, there might be people in the audience who might decide that they want to run someday. And I guess just know that it doesn't have to be immediate. Like, I think timing really is everything. And so I think it's worth really strategically thinking about those questions of, what level, what party, and then really taking a look at what that looks like for you, and that it doesn't have to be an urgent decision. And if it does seem like there's an opportunity right around the corner, it can happen really fast. And I think, you really just want to start talking to folks, of course, the people in your network, in your family, making sure that they're on board, and that you really have some cheerleaders behind you, in your family, but also in your network, who are going to kind of stand behind you, because it can be difficult. But then I think you also want to get, assuming that it is at the provincial or federal level where there is parties, you can start getting involved in the riding associations at any time. You can even join a riding association. They're often looking for people to get engaged. And so I think if this is something that is on your horizon, that's a great thing to do at any time, is just start getting engaged right now. And that will also help you get kind of a feel for it, see it a little bit more up closely, to see if it really is something that you want to do by actually putting your name on the ballot.
I think that Katie and Dan both offered great advice on this. And what I'll add is that I think it's really important for people who want to go into electoral politics to really understand why they're doing it. And like really understand, why is it that you want to go into this work, and hold on to that reason, because like I said earlier, there are going to be happy and wonderful, and also very challenging, difficult times. And being grounded in the reason why you ran in the first place, being grounded in the reason why you decided to do this in the first place, will help guide you through those challenging times, and help guide the kinds of decisions that you make as you go forward through this process. Right from the fact that you're, even when you're a candidate, all the way into when you're actually elected. I remember that, and I recognize I'm biased in this way. I personally believe that the reason why you want, the best reason for you to run for an elected position, well, rather not, let's say the worst reason for you to run in for elected office is for yourself. That's the worst reason. I really strongly believe that the reason why you do this has to be for other people. It has to be, there has to be a very strong element of service in this. I remember I was giving a talk at I can't remember, it was a talk like this somewhere else and another time. And somebody said, I didn't even know that this was a career that we could have chosen, being a politician. How do I become a politician as my career? And I actually think that this is not something that you should see as a career. It should be something that you see as a part of your civic, like your service to your community and your service to your province, your service to your country, your service to people around you. And if it's about yourself, then I worry that that may guide your decisions in ways that aren't necessarily beneficial for the public. And so when you do this, know why you're running. But if you're confident in the reason why you're running, and you think you want to do this, then definitely I don't allow. Sorry, I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble communicating today, but there are so many wonderful candidates out there, particularly they tend to be women or people of color who underestimate the value that they can bring to a table. Younger people often underestimate the value that they can bring to the table. Knowing why you're running is important, but also know that you have value to bring to the table, and don't let people, don't let the folks, don't let the bastards get you down, let's just say.
Go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to add something that maybe this is part of what you're trying to say, Bowen, is don't wait to be asked, I think is another big thing, because I think especially women and young women, they feel like they have to be asked, like someone has to come and at some point tap you on the shoulder and say, will you be our candidate? And that doesn't have to be the case. Like if you think that if you have a reason to serve and you bring a lot to the table, don't wait to be asked.
Hear, hear.
The awesome thing was the last question I was going to ask was I was going to invite each of you to give an inspirational statement to the audience for anybody who's thinking about doing this. So, Bo and Katie, I think you both did an excellent job there. However, I didn't ask the question yet, so I will invite each of you to make one closing remark. So maybe Dan, we'll start with you.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Darren. I think the most flattering comment that I've ever been given, because it resonated with me that it cannot be about you. It cannot be about you. You will turn yourself into knots if that's why you're getting into politics. Reluctant leadership is probably something that we want in leaders. So reluctantly giving up their career to support a cause that they feel so strongly in. That they're willing to make a legitimate sacrifice to do it. So credit to Katie and Bowen, sacrificing careers, or sacrificing a point in time in your career, I should say, to pursue politics when it only gives you up to 4 years of job security, as far as last time I checked. So it is something that has to be about something bigger than yourself. So reluctant leadership is a good quality to have in politicians.
Katie?
Well, I think, the big one is if you do want to run, don't wait to be asked. But I think another big point, everyone listening, probably not everybody is going to run. But another important aspect of this is to support scientists that do run. You can donate to candidates from many different political parties. You can volunteer on campaigns, even if people are, among different parties. I personally have supported people from many different parties, but if we want to see more scientists elected, I think part of it is that we also need to show up and support the ones that do run.
Bowen?
Being able to serve as an MLA has been the greatest honor of my life. I'll add the caveat that I don't have children. I think that's pretty amazing as well. If you're a parent, I think that it probably gives you different perspective. But so far, as someone who doesn't have children, this has been the most important thing that I've done. But it has not been easy. And it is in that challenge that struggle and that responsibility that makes this work so important. And so if you are somebody who is willing to make those sacrifices for your community, for your society, your province, and so forth, then please do put your name forward, because we need people who are running for the right reasons.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists for spending the time with us today. I thought that this was fascinating, some incredible perspectives, and hopefully gives folks that are watching a sense of what it's really like. And, just one last plug for what we